Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thanks for stopping by again. It's been a while since I did the last video. I've had a head cold, and I felt as if I was speaking from the end of a long, dark tunnel when I tried a video a couple of days ago, and I just decided I would wait until this was past. I think it has now pretty well. I trust you can hear me without any difficulty, and I sound fairly normal. I do get messages from time to time. I have been from the very first time I started getting messages 12, 13 years ago. And someone will say something along the lines of, everybody thinks I'm crazy, that I'm going to be living overseas, or I'm living in Panama, or some such. It may be their family, it might be friends, or work associates, or something. But just are shocked and stunned that they'd even be considering just such a move. I get a huge kick out of that. This usually comes as a result of several different factors. One of those is that these people perhaps have never set foot out of their own country, and certainly never set foot in Panama, and have no real idea, no experience of their own. But they've read something somewhere, or seen something somewhere, or video somewhere, or whatever, and it might be a very long time ago what they saw, what they read. A lot of people, older people particularly, have a lot of 20th century memories, and that century's gone. It's truly gone. So these stories, in their minds, indicate Panama is a dangerous place to be. I had a member at Retirement Wave, it was quite a while back here, some years ago, but he wrote me and said that he was finally coming down to Panama to take a look, and he'd gone into his travel agent. Here's a man who actually uses a travel agent, and said he wanted a ticket to Panama City, and the travel agent said, "You don't want to go there. It's too dangerous. You have to have a bodyguard. Everybody who goes down has to have a bodyguard." And he wrote me and said he couldn't believe that was true, but he did have to ask. And I said, "No, you do not need a bodyguard." I don't know where that man came up with that idea. Maybe sometime in the distant past of Panama that might have been true, but I doubt it. But whatever the point is, it's totally untrue. But this is the response he was getting from supposedly a sophisticated travel agent who you expect to be up to date on these things. So you can get all sorts of stuff. It often depends too on whether the news source or whatever is someone with a very strong bias or prejudice one way or the other, or a commercial interest, or this sort of thing. And they'll pick out a particular story or a particular occurrence and turn that into the story of Panama, when in fact it's just one little tree in a very big forest. As I mentioned on my last report, this is a problem sometimes. Well, just set those aside, because they don't know what they're talking about, quite literally, and they're just talking about what somebody else talked about or wants them to think or whatever. Not good enough. So don't worry about those folks. They really don't know. Another group may think they know now because they've heard stories more recently, but it's the same problem of a strong bias. I speak about that elsewhere in videos here at the channel. But again, if you look at a tree or trees, you get this sense of this is Panama, when in fact it's much more than that. So you do have to take into account whether or not there's a political agenda, a commercial agenda, whatever agenda, that's a personal agenda that somebody has in saying what they say about Panama. Another thing, that group that sometimes cause confusion for people are those who actually lived and worked in Panama. These are typically, because of the history of Panama, they're typically Americans who worked here during the Canal Zone days. Now, when I worked in former British colonies in Africa, I had the same thing from Brits who had worked in Ghana, for example, back in the colonial days. And they would go back to these experiences and they would tell people, "Oh, this is what it's like. These are what the people are like, what they do, what you can expect, and everything else." And they're just totally out of date. And I mentioned in another video here that I had that happen to me once in a country that I spent quite a bit of time in Africa, and asked me what it was like there. And I thought gave a very positive, upbeat, detailed answer, only to discover later on that I was wrong. And so many of the facts that I tossed out, I shared with him. because things had changed. I went back on the internet and took a closer look at that country and realized, oh, I don't even recognize it now. I saw photographs in my neighborhood I lived in, and well, I had a good laugh over that. So things do change, and this is 2017, folks. We're 1/6 of the way through the 21st century already. Memories from that period, the 20th century, have less relevance today. To put it gently, they are almost invariably going to be totally out of date. Now, people will say, well, why? How could things have changed so quickly? And my traditional answer, as you've heard on occasion, boils down to the words, the dynamic economy of Panama in the 21st century. And it's true. But there are actually three basic forces, I think, at work that really add to this. One of those is that the average Panamanian is 28 years old. Now, the average American, Canadian, European, Chinese, Japanese, all of these nations that went through World War II lost a lot of people, especially childbearing age, and then later had to rebuild their populations. They had baby booms. Panama did not have that effect. So they have the other nations have this large group of people born in that baby boom period, which differs a little from country to country, but it's very, very common. And those nations that were actively involved in World War II, or China, which was that and had a one-child per family policy, so they have a very large older population. It raises the average age dramatically. So these other nations, the average citizen are 10 to 15 years older than they are here. So if you're 28 years old, an average Panamanian, you've spent 17 and a half, about 60% of your life in the 21st century, and have 85% of your real memories from the 21st century. And to talk about the 60s, 70s, 80s is just way too far back. If you're 40 years old from one of the baby boom nations, as an average person, then you've spent 17 here, but you've had 23 in the 20th century. So the majority of your life was spent in the 20th, and you were an adult in the 20th. And this has an impact on you and your memories and what you bring with you from the 20th century. So having a younger nation, in this sense, the majority of the population here just really doesn't know what you're talking about when you are talking about something back in the 20th century, back in the 80s and 90s and so on. They've heard of it, but it's not their experience, and their experience is rooted in what is happening today, and that's really so dramatically different that it's like me when I was young, growing up, hearing about the Depression. I understood about it. I understood it. I was sorry for people going through it, but I didn't experience it. I couldn't really feel it as somebody who had been through the Depression, a very serious affair. Likewise, World War II. So that has to be kept in mind. That has an impact. The population here is, as all young generations do, remaking the country. They just happen to be a much larger group now here, as we were once before, decades ago, in my own original home nation, the United States. Then a second very powerful force is the internet. The internet, well, half the country has got their own connection to the internet, and the other half accesses it at school or at offices or at their laptops out in many different hot spots, Wi-Fi spots scattered all over the country, in parks and libraries and what have you, where people can freely gain access to the internet. It's just amazing when you're out in the rural areas and you're talking to somebody living in a relatively small village and so forth, and seemingly of a limited educational background, maybe a high school degree, and ask them if they have an email address, and they do. They may go down to the library to access it. But that was true in the early days of the internet in the United States and other countries as well. But it's happening here so rapidly that to have your own internet connection is becoming very, very ordinary. And this is also a country very much into smartphones and very big Samsung territory, although you iPhone people will find you have your supporters here too. So all of this means a great deal more communication going on, knowledge of what's going on in the world, things that used to take 3 or 4 years to trickle down here from the North, new ideas and fads and what have you can be down here in 3 months or 6 months or shorter, because people are aware of these things. They keep track of them. So the Internet's had its impact. The third force that I think of, and I frankly consider this to be perhaps for the average person, the single most powerful force, is summed up in 2 words: disposable income. Now, in countries like Panama was never a wretchedly poor country. It's always been sort of mid-level. And limited resources, but people, when they paid off their bills at the end of the month, had a little money left over. That was nice, and they would go to a restaurant or something of that sort. But with the economy's growth over the last couple of decades, more and more Panamanians, including young Panamanians who before had very simple jobs, now have somewhat more responsible jobs, they find themselves with substantially more disposable income at the end of the month than their parents. And their parents have more at the end of their month than their parents, and so forth. So with increasing amounts of disposable income, you now create demand for all sorts of products and services that there simply wasn't a market for them 20 years ago. There is today. So they're here. And there are new ones coming up all the time. And people begin to become more individualistic. They break up, and not purposefully, they just go and follow their own interests, and they can do so. They have the money to spend on it, and it's available. So all sorts of interest groups pop up, and society becomes much more complicated, so to speak, but at the same time, much more interesting, because there's so much more available to the individual Panamanian than was true 20 or 30 years ago, for sure. The same has happened in other countries as well, but it's been very rapid in a nation like Panama. So all of this has changed the nation dramatically. And Panamanians are still Panamanians, like Americans are Americans, and French are French, and Japanese are Japanese, and so forth. But in truth, all of these groups change over time. And here it's been particularly rapid in the last 15 years. If you haven't been here in 15 years, and you could have been here in this century, you'd still be very much surprised, very surprised when you came back again. Because of all of this, it has changed so much that when you run into people who say, "You're crazy, oh, this is terrible, oh, it's awful down there," in almost every case, indeed I'd say in every case, they're wrong. Right? You will know that when you get here. But don't let that scare you off. In fact, the ones who write me say they're not going to let that stop them because they have plenty of information available to them indicating otherwise. Well, good for them. But if it's entered into your mind, don't get hung up on that. I mean, if you've got a specific concern, write me. I can try to respond as best I can. But really, honestly, you have to get down here and take a look around and realize it's not, if that's what you thought, that it was a dangerous place or a wild and crazy place or a machismo country or all this sort of stuff, you can take care of that inside of a couple of days. Just come on down. So I hope that we'll get a chance to see you when you do come down. And to those of you who are concerned about this, you're in your right mind. Whether or not you choose to move here or not, or move somewhere else or not move at all, is entirely your business. But you're not crazy for thinking about moving somewhere new and somewhere different. So thank you very much for dropping by, and I look forward to seeing you again.